All right, excuse me, everyone's attention. Oh, wait till everyone sits down. Is it on?
No. I don't think so. No.
You know what's on?
I think it's on for
Oh,
camera's on.
yes. If you can't hear me, I'll speak up. Let me know. If not, yeah, it's just for recording. Anyway, Dr. LaBelle's not here. He's gone for the week, so I'm giving a lecture today. I apologize ahead. It's a very boring lecture. It's going to be like walls of text. So if you have questions, please ask to sort of help make it not as boring and me just reading. Okay? All right, cool. So after this lecture, you guys will be doing your verification testing too. So sort of going over if you're ready to move on to actually start building and stuff like that. And later in the day, if you do feel like you're ready, you can ask me and one of the other TAs, and we'll give you approval or not. But if you're lost, you can just ask one of the TAs for help and sort of help get you to that next point for possibly next week. Okay? And the DT3 was due before class, and DT4 will be posted during the lecture, and that will be due next week before class. Okay, so today we're going over the 22 immutable laws of marketing. And there's a PDF and Amazon version of it if you want. So we'll just sort of start off with the first two here. So the first two are related, and what we sort of have here is the first one is the law of leadership. And the law of leadership is wanting to be first in something. So for the most part, everyone knows who was the first person to fly across the Atlantic, but no one knows who the second person was. But then for the law of category, what we have is that you make yourself a new category in order to be first in that. So everyone knows who the third person was, and that was Amelia. And so she was the first woman to fly across the Atlantic. So she wasn't the first person to do it, but she was the first woman, so she made herself a new category in order to be first in it. Cool. Am I going too fast? You can just stop me. Everything's good. I'm sure you just want to get back to work. So the law of the mind is to be sort of first in the mind. And so the example we have here is sort of Apple. Apple's an easy name to remember. If you look at like Hewlett-Packard, they're sort of a long name. People refer to them as HP now, but if they went by that long name, it's sort of difficult to keep in your mind who they are, and Apple comes first. So if you're looking at computers or something, they're the ones going to pop in your mind without even knowing their technology. The next one is sort of the law of perception. The law of perception is not to do with your product, but how you're perceived by the market. So a big example is looking at like name brand products compared to generic products. Most people think name brand products are better than a generic version, even though for the most part they always have the exact same ingredients and work the same. So that's sort of the law of perception. Without doing any additional work, just your name itself puts you above everyone else. And the law of focus is sort of owning a word. So Dr. LaBelle had Federal Express up here for overnight, but I think what's more applicable is sort of Amazon and Prime. When people think of free shipping, a lot of times Prime comes to your mind, and so you sort of own this word Prime. And so if you're looking for quick free shipping, you're going to think of Amazon and want to go to them to get that. Okay, everyone good? Everything's okay? It's pretty straightforward. The law of exclusivity is basically two companies cannot own the same word or have the same prospect in mind. So the example here is sort of fast. So when it comes to fast food, people think of McDonald's, but sort of basically no other company can own the word Prime either. So if someone else said Prime for their shipping company, you're not going to associate them by their own company. You'll think of Amazon right away because they have more of a hold on that word, and they were the first to that word to use it and relate it to shipping and everything else with it. The law of the ladder is basically sort of where you fall on the rung of ladders compared to companies. And so in this case, it might be better to be lower on the ladder if you're dealing with a ladder that's full of big companies. So if you look at like medical devices, and you think of maybe Gore, Medtronic, and your company on their ladder, but if you think of a very small sort of one-off startup company, you won't sort of hold them to the same reputation as you would the bigger companies. And that has nothing to do with the skills or the products they have, it's just to do with their name and how reputable their company is and how long they've been over time and such. So we're kind of going through this. And so the law of duality, basically it sort of comes down to, it's sort of a phrase because it's not always a two-horse race. The example up there is sort of batteries, and there's more batteries that are bigger names than Everready and Duracell. But sort of essentially what you have is all these companies that start up or products that are being marketed, eventually it comes down to either two or sort of the top sort of couple that are the big competitors out there. And so everyone else sort of weeds off, even if they don't have anything different than the other companies, just their marketing sort of moves them into this small category, and that's who you're going to pick up every time. And the law of opposite, so law of opposite is sort of like making a new category, being first in something. If you're going to follow someone else's steps, in whatever category it may be, so you guys are doing like a medical device game, you sort of want to do something opposite of that, and you're still within that same category. So you would maybe pick a different medical sort of illness to deal with, and you're still in this medical sort of category game, but you're opposite from what they were doing. I think that makes sense. Does that make sense? That was kind of a bad description, but anyway, so basically you want to make yourself different so you're not following someone else's footsteps, because if you follow someone else's footsteps, you end up being second, and you won't be first anyway, and you'll sort of fall off the edge. And so on number 10, still a lot more, law of division. Basically what it comes down to is larger categories will end up dividing down into smaller subcategories that are more precise. So the example here is computers, but so basically computers, when that category first came out, using computer, there was just one type, right? You just looked at one computer, but now there's sort of laptops, there's watches, there's desktops, there's other sort of computers that fall under the same category. So it's just something to look into, and they all kind of relate, but that's sort of separating yourself out from under one category, sort of making a subcategory. So the law of perspective is what it comes to sort of over time is sort of how advertising and marketing play a role in sort of your product's future. So in this case, when you look at sales on an item, if you see a sale of something, you're going to purchase it because it's a lower price. But if a company keeps doing sales, you're not going to ever buy their product at full price, right? Because you know eventually there's going to be something down the line where it will be cheaper for you to get. So it sort of shows that the trend over time of having sales or something similar to that, you will basically train your customers to not buy anything at full price. The law of line extension is sort of extending your product line into multiple things. So like GE and Procter & Gamble are kind of a good example of having a line of extension because they do a ton of different kind of products out there. But an example in the bad case is so they use the A1 steak sauce, and so at one point they tried to do some type of sauce for poultry, and they failed at that. And sort of their problem was that they tried to expand, and they were just only experts in the one area for doing steak sauce. So this sort of, there are a few companies that are the exception, but for the most part it ends up hurting your company because you're sort of distributing resources or trying to do all in one encompass, and for the most part that doesn't work out for anyone. Cool. And so law of sacrifice is sort of stating that you basically have to give up something in order to get something out of it. So in this case, there's sort of three parts, and there's product line, target market, and constant change. So if you have a small product line, you're kind of giving up constant change. Where if you had a large product line, you maybe would have constant change to your products in order to have this vast sort of array and to hit multiple targets. And if you do a small target, a small sort of target to market to, you sort of decrease your product line. So you have to give up something in order to have the other categories. The law of attributes, there's basically an opposite attribute that's effective. So in this case, the example's a little old, but Crest, so they used to own cavities, and it'd be sort of, it wouldn't be useful to a new company to try to advertise that they are also really good at protecting against cavities because Crest already owns that. So what they do is, on top of making toothpaste to protect your teeth, they also then advertise either their whitening or they have fresher breath or something like that. So what they do is they take another attribute and they then market it, and then they over sort of sell that to sort of show that their toothpaste has this better sort of ingredient or product to it. And then you should sort of draw your attention to that instead, rather than sort of following in the footsteps. The law of candor is sort of, what's the best way to do it? The law of candor is basically like sort of an open, honest sort of company. A lot of times when companies come out with an issue, if there's a negative part of it, everyone believes it, no matter to what extent. But when a company comes out and says like everything's perfect and great, people always take it sort of with a grain of salt, and they might not actually believe what they're saying. So this sort of just sort of stating that it's better to be open and honest and sort of see your product's failures and that you can fix it. Okay. Any other questions? Do you have any comments, Blake?
I think you're doing very
good. All right. Okay, I'm sorry about the text. We're almost done. just 6 more. So law of singularity. In each situation, only one move will produce substantial results. So this is kind of what you guys have been doing when you did your state-of-the-art review. You're sort of looking at these games that you want to compare yourself to, and you're looking at the one small key areas that they fail at, and that's what you're then developing your game off of. So what you sort of have is there's always one part of a product, or in your case a game, that'll have its pitfalls, and you sort of want to exploit that to the point that shows that your game or your product is much better than theirs because they fall or lack this one category. And sort of exploiting that sort of brings down the other company's product and sort of shows pitfalls, and then you sort of show how you are better than that, and then it helps bring up your company. And it's a good way to do marketing, advertising, and you see it all the time. The law of unpredictability is sort of just a general statement. But basically how to sort of predict for unpredictability is either doing a prediction, and sort of the example here is trying to predict weather. So even though the weather is almost never right, except maybe here in Arizona where it's always sunny, for the most part it's really hard to guess, even with all the computers, so you do sort of a scientific guess, so kind of like a hypothesis. Where then on the other hand, you can just take a chance and it sort of is a random guess at sort of predicting how the market will accept this or even if it's useful. So it's sort of best to do the prediction, which is what you guys have sort of done with all your background research and knowledge, that you're predicting based on sort of scientific evidence or previous literature that this will work, rather than just guessing and just it's an idea you like and hopefully everyone else will. The law of success. Law of success is sort of more of a general statement too, but when people become successful, they tend up being arrogant and they sort of lose focus of what they had before. So what you'll have is people who will not be as subjective as they were to products and will sort of just go with what the market flow is doing rather than trying to predict how the market's going to go and adapt to it. For the most part, they're just sort of going as what's coming at them and changing. So at that point, once you become sort of this type of arrogance, you end up failing down the road because you're not being sort of innovative and sort of picking out the key areas rather than just picking what everyone is telling them to. The law of failure, sort of back to the law of candor, and sort of everyone expects you to fail, and you will, and they just sort of want you to be sort of honest about it. And so they want to see that when you do fail, that you own up to it, and then you move on and fix it from there. And then the law of hype. The law of hype sort of is stating that if the more times a company is advertising, the worse they're, for the most part, doing off. So I didn't know about this, I had to look it up, but New Coke came out as when they changed their ingredients over, I think in the 80s, and they wanted to change from Coca-Cola to say New Coke, and they spent more than $1 billion trying to advertise New Coke, but obviously we don't have a New Coke, we still have Coca-Cola. And so they spent all this money, and you would think if they were spending all this money in advertising, they would be very successful. But what ended up happening is it obviously failed, and they're just Coca-Cola still. So it's sort of a trend in the market to see when there's more marketing or advertising going out, the companies for the most part doing worse on that product. And so the last two, the law of accelerations is based on a company is built, a successful company is built on trends, not fads. So fads come and go, and what you end up having is if you build for fads, you have a lot of high costs associated with like tooling, manufacturing, distributions, and such. So you have a lot of lost money that you can't build upon. Where you build on a trend, you can sort of reuse your previous supplies and equipment, and you sort of save money in the long run. So you end up making money rather than losing money. And then the last one is law of resources, and the law of resources is basically no good idea can get off the ground without enough funding. So have enough funding in order to make the product and also to advertise it, because if you have a good idea, no one's going to know about it unless you advertise it and get it out to the public. So what you need to do is have the funding behind it in order to get it into the minds of the consumers. Cool. So that's kind of a lot. Does anyone have any questions on it or comments? I know it was boring, but anything? This type of stuff will be sort of expected to be into your elevator pitches and then into your overall game. So some of them I know are general statements that maybe you can't answer, but a lot of them are very applicable to your project, like the law of leadership and the law of categories and such like that. Those things should be in your game, and you can either sort of state it out when we talk to you, but it should be something you're aware of and are using it. Cool? Okay, there's just a few sum up slides, basically what you're doing today. This is what is the verification, so what you're looking for. So is the game fun? Does it target the right audience? Is it easy enough? Are the rules clear and concise? I'll leave this up after so you guys can read it. If you think you're close or want to ask for approval, you can kind of go down this list and make sure before you come talk to us that you are good. And then just moving towards beta, which is they all sort of work back and forth. And then DT number 4 is due next week before class. That should be it. Yep. Cool. Any questions? Quick raise of hand. Does anyone think they're ready? I know Sarah's group does, but anyone else? No? Okay. I would use this then as a template from where you're at and what steps you need to take forward. If you're stuck on any of them or not sure, just come grab me or one of the TAs and we'll sort of help work you through that to hopefully next week you guys can be ready or close to. Cool?